He called me into his office, my boss Richard Sterling, Vice President of Marketing Innovation and Inclusion, a title as bloated and self-important as the man himself. He leaned back, steepling his fingers, that familiar condescending smile playing on his lips. "Mark," he began, his voice dripping with that fake therapeutic concern he always used, "we need to talk about your integration. Your engagement with our departmental values." I braced myself. Here it came. "This mandatory diversity training," he continued, leaning forward slightly, the smile tightening, "it's intensive. Multi-day. Frankly, Mark, consider it a crucial opportunity. Perhaps even your last chance to demonstrate you're truly aligned with where this team and this company is heading." The threat hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. Conform to his rigid, woke ideology, participate enthusiastically in his re-education camp, or my decade-long career here was over. He thought he had me backed into a corner, checkmated by his corporate buzzwords and veiled threats. He saw me as resistant, problematic, a nail sticking up that needed hammering down. He saw me as finished. He had no idea that later that same night, fueled by sheer indignation and desperation, I'd stumble upon the digital skeletons rattling in his closet. The emails that would expose him, Mr. Inclusivity himself, as the most toxic, two-faced, racist and sexist hypocrite I'd ever encountered. He thought he was about to purge me. He didn't know I was about to detonate his entire carefully constructed charade. Before Richard arrived, my life had a rhythm, a comfortable predictability. A Mark, by the way. Just a regular guy, married, dad to 2 amazing kids, a 12-year-old son obsessed with baseball and a 9-year-old daughter who could already out-argue me. For nearly 10 years, I'd worked as a marketing manager at this tech company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, paid the bills, and allowed me to coach Little League and make it home for dinner most nights. That stability? That was everything. Our department used to run smoothly under our previous boss, Sarah. She was straightforward, maybe a bit old school, but fundamentally fair. She cared about results, about campaigns hitting their marks, about clear communication. We had targets, we had pressure, but it was professional pressure, not ideological pressure. The team dynamic was collaborative, generally low drama. People helped each other out. We could joke around, grab lunch, talk about things other than work without fear of saying the wrong thing. I wouldn't have called myself particularly political one way or the other back then. I just believed in treating people decently, judging them on their work and character, not their identity group or their adherence to the latest social fad. Live and let live, you know? Common sense. I had zero patience for empty gestures or people using fancy language to feel superior while achieving nothing. We were grounded, focused. I could leave work at 5:30, switch off, and be present for my family. It was a balance I cherished. A balance Richard Sterling seemed determined to obliterate from the moment he walked through the door. Richard didn't just walk in. He swept in, trailing clouds of expensive cologne and pronouncements about synergy, paradigm shifts, and centering marginalized voices. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, always dressed like he was stepping out of a magazine, with a smile that felt surgically attached and eyes that constantly scanned, assessed, judged. His title alone, VP of Marketing Innovation and Inclusion, should have been a red flag. It signaled that inclusion wasn't just part of the job, it was the mission. His very first team meeting was less about marketing goals and more like a university lecture on critical theory. He lectured us for 30 minutes straight about systemic oppression, unconscious bias, and our collective complicity. Then came the mandatory introductions, complete with preferred pronouns. We went around the virtual circle one by one. "Hi, I'm Sarah," she/her. "John," he/him. It felt incredibly forced, like some bizarre corporate ritual. When it was my turn, I mumbled, "Mark, marketing manager," he/him, feeling my cheeks flush. Richard beamed, praising our collective vulnerability and courage. But I caught it, a fleeting glint of smug satisfaction in his eyes as a couple of older team members stumbled awkwardly through their pronouns. He seemed to enjoy the discomfort he was creating, masking it as enlightenment. It didn't take long for him to start dismantling our actual work. Campaigns that had previously been successful, driving leads and engagement, were suddenly problematic. "This imagery," he declared in one review, pointing to a stock photo of people smiling at a picnic, "reinforces harmful stereotypes about traditional family structures. It lacks diversity." Another time, reviewing ad copy, he stated, The term customer satisfaction guaranteed centers a capitalist transactional mindset. We need more community-centric language. He dismissed data, actual performance metrics showing what resonated with our audience, with airy waves of his hand and pronouncements about leading with our values and disrupting dominant narratives. It felt like we were creating marketing for an imaginary audience of hypercritical academics, not real people who might buy our products. The first time he singled me out personally was during a brainstorming session. We were trying to figure out a launch strategy and I said something like, "If we get the messaging right, we can really knock this launch out of the park." Standard office talk. But Richard stopped everything. "Mark," he interjected, his voice soft but cutting through the room. "Let's pause there. While I appreciate the enthusiasm, the metaphor 'knock it out of the park,' it evokes imagery of aggression, competition. Perhaps we can find language that fosters a more collaborative, less zero-sum approach." The air went still. Everyone stared at their screens or the table. I felt like an idiot called out for using a common expression. Sure, Richard. Sorry," I mumbled. He gave that tight little smile. "No need to apologize. Just an opportunity for awareness." But the underlying message was crystal clear. I am watching you. Every word. The unease I felt leaving that meeting was profound. This wasn't just management, it was policing. And it was escalating. Richard's mission creep accelerated. Our department became his personal social justice laboratory. He introduced Woke Wednesdays, mandatory hour-long meetings where we had to read and discuss articles he selected, usually dense academic pieces on topics like white fragility, intersectional feminism, or decolonizing algorithms. Attendance was logged. Participation, meaning vocal agreement with Richard's takes, was heavily encouraged. Silence drew pointed questions. "Mark, you seem quiet today. What are your reflections on the inherent biases discussed in this piece?" Asking clarifying questions, or worse, offering a different perspective, was framed as resistance or not being open to unlearning. One session involved dissecting a company advertisement from 5 years ago, finding every conceivable microaggression and instance of systemic bias. It felt less like learning and more like a public shaming ritual, designed to make us confess our thought crimes. Then came the anonymous psychological safety reporting channel. The email announcing it was full of corporate doublespeak about fostering trust, but the examples of reportable offenses were terrifyingly broad, using language that could be perceived as non-inclusive, misgendering, intentional or unintentional, expressing opinions that invalidate lived experiences, failing to acknowledge privilege. It wasn't about stopping genuine harassment, it was an open invitation to weaponize sensitivity, to anonymously denounce colleagues for stepping outside Richard's narrow ideological lines. The office atmosphere, already strained, became positively glacial. Water cooler chat died. People kept their heads down, interactions became brief and purely transactional. The easy camaraderie we'd shared felt like a distant memory, replaced by a pervasive low-grade fear. You didn't know who might report you for an off-the-cuff remark or an insufficiently enthusiastic agreement during Woke Wednesday. Richard's favoritism also became blatant. Certain colleagues, mostly younger ones who quickly learned to mimic his jargon and perform emotional vulnerability during meetings. As a cishet man, I'm really sitting with my privilege after reading that article. Suddenly got assigned the best projects, received glowing public praise from Richard, and had their minor mistakes waved away as growth moments. Meanwhile, veterans like myself or others who focused quietly on delivering quality work without the performative wokeness, found ourselves increasingly sidelined. My project proposals faced intense scrutiny, always through Richard's preferred lens. I submitted a detailed market analysis report, backed by solid data. His feedback: "Mark, this analysis feels very data-driven. It lacks a qualitative exploration of the intersectional experiences of our potential user base. Where is the narrative of the marginalized?" When I asked politely for specific examples of how to incorporate that, he just repeated jargon about decentering whiteness and amplifying unheard voices, offering zero practical guidance. It was maddening. He wasn't managing, he was gatekeeping based on ideological purity. I remember one afternoon grabbing coffee, my colleague Emily, usually very quiet and cautious, pulled me aside, her eyes darting around the empty break room. "Mark, this is getting unbearable, right?" she whispered urgently. The woke Wednesdays, the reporting tool, it feels like we're walking through a minefield. I'm scared to say anything anymore. I just nodded grimly, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. You're not alone, I murmured back. Just then, another colleague walked in, and Emily immediately clammed up, forcing a bright smile and changing the subject to the weather. That small interaction said everything. Richard hadn't just introduced new policies, he'd introduced fear. I started meticulously saving every email, every piece of nonsensical feedback, jotting down notes after every uncomfortable meeting. I didn't know what I'd do with it, but I needed proof I wasn't imagining the suffocating absurdity of it all. The breaking point, the moment passive frustration curdled into active resistance, arrived disguised as an urgent departmental update. Richard called an all-hands meeting, his expression unusually grave. Team, he began, pacing slowly in front of his webcam, it has become evident, despite our ongoing efforts, that certain, entrenched perspectives are hindering our collective journey towards true equity and inclusion. His gaze flickered towards me, lingered just a fraction too long, then swept over a few other known quiet skeptics. Everyone noticed. There are gaps in understanding, he continued, misalignments with our core company values that need to be addressed directly and comprehensively. And then the hammer blow. Therefore, effective next month, our entire department will be participating in a mandatory, intensive multi-day diversity, equity, and inclusion training program. He stressed our department. Not the whole company. Just us. The problem children. The way he said it, the framing, it wasn't professional development. It was remediation. It was a collective punishment aimed squarely at those who hadn't sufficiently bought into his program. This deep dive, he added, his voice smooth but firm, will equip us all with the tools needed to dismantle harmful biases and ensure this department becomes a benchmark for psychological safety and belonging. The subtext screamed, "Some of you are the problem and this is how we fix or purge you." A wave of hot, helpless anger washed over me. This wasn't about diversity, it was about ideological cleansing. A few days later he summoned me for that one-on-one. The sterile white walls of his office felt like they were closing in. After the obligatory small talk he got down to it. "Mark," he said, leaning back, that calculated smile fixed in place. "Your technical marketing skills are adequate." The word hung there, a deliberate slight. "But I have growing concerns about your overall contribution to the team's culture. Let's call it reluctance. During our DI discussions, your lack of visible enthusiasm for these crucial initiatives, it sends a message, Mark. A message that isn't aligned with our values." My pulse quickened. This was it. He was laying the groundwork. "This upcoming training," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming almost conspiratorial, "is a significant investment. It's also a significant opportunity, for you. An opportunity to demonstrate genuine growth, learning, and allyship. Frankly," he leaned forward again, dropping the pretense, his eyes cold, "your future advancement opportunities here, even your continued role in this department, could very well depend on how fully you embrace this program. How visibly you commit." The threat was naked now. Perform wokeness to his satisfaction, or I was out. No mention of my actual job performance, my sales figures, my campaign successes over the years. Just my insufficient ideological fervor. I walked out of his office in a daze, the anger quickly solidifying into something harder, colder. This wasn't just a bad boss. This was a tyrant cloaked in progressive language. He preached inclusivity while actively seeking to exclude anyone who didn't goose-step to his tune. The sheer, staggering hypocrisy of it lit a fire under me. He wanted to force me out for insufficient wokeness? Fine. Let's see how woke he really was. That night, after the kids were asleep, I poured a strong coffee, sat down at my computer, and logged into the company's remote archive server. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe expense report discrepancies? Shady vendor contracts? I just started digging into Richard Sterling's digital history at the company, determined to find something. Anything. The search felt like panning for gold in a river of corporate mud. Hours bled into the night. I trawled through old project folders, departmental archives, cross-functional team drives from his previous role and strategy. Most of it was mind-numbingly boring, PowerPoint decks full of buzzwords, dense strategy memos, meeting minutes. Doubt gnawed at me. Maybe he really was the perfect woke warrior in private too? Was I just grasping at straws, fueled by resentment? My eyes burned from staring at the screen. I was about to give up, call it a night. And then I saw it. Tucked away in an obscure subfolder for a long-forgotten task force he'd been on 2 years ago, a folder accidentally saved with overly broad permissions, was an email thread. Not a work discussion. The subject line was simple. Weekend plans? Curiosity, sharp and sudden, cut through my fatigue. I clicked it open. The initial messages were mundane. Banter between Richard and someone with an external email address, probably an old buddy. Then the tone shifted. My breath hitched. Richard, the DI champion, started making jokes. Vile, racist jokes targeting black people, invoking disgusting stereotypes. He made crude, mocking comments about Hispanic colleagues' accents. He launched into sexist tirades about senior female executives, assessing their looks, dismissing their intellect, using language that made my stomach churn. My hands started shaking as I scrolled, disbelief warring with a sickening surge of adrenaline. It got worse. Interspersed with the bigotry were comments viciously mocking the very DEI initiatives the company was just beginning to explore back then. He called mandatory sensitivity training a joke for HR snowflakes. He referred to pronoun declarations as performative liberal garbage. He used actual slurs. He griped about affirmative action hires and how guys like us were being persecuted. It was all there. Dated. Time-stamped. Sent from his official work email. The mask hadn't just slipped, it disintegrated. The man forcing diversity training on me, threatening my job for insufficient allyship, was privately a raging bigot who despised everything he publicly preached. The disgust was overwhelming, but underneath it was a cold, hard certainty. This was the weapon I needed. This wasn't just hypocrisy, it was grounds for immediate dismissal. This man was fundamentally unfit for any leadership role, let alone one focused on inclusion. He wasn't just putting on a show. He was a fraud, a dangerous manipulator hiding behind the shield of progressive virtue. I meticulously saved the entire email chain as a PDF, triple-checking it was secure on my personal drive. The tremor in my hands was gone, replaced by icy calm. Richard had pushed me too far, underestimated me completely. He thought the fight was about ideology. He had no idea I was about to bring the receipts. Undeniable, career-ending receipts. The next morning felt strangely serene. I had the evidence. Now it was about deploying it strategically. I spent an hour composing a carefully worded email. No emotion, no accusations, just cold, hard facts. I addressed it to Brenda Riley, the head of HR, and David Chin, the executive vice president Richard reported to, the man who had hired Richard, presumably for his progressive credentials. I briefly explained that I had inadvertently discovered these communications within archived company files while searching for project-related materials. I stated that given the disturbing content, Richard's current role, and his recent mandate for departmental DEI training, I felt ethically obligated to bring this to their attention immediately. I attached the PDF. I reread it one last time. This was it. Point of no return. Exposing a VP was risky. Retaliation was always a possibility despite official policies. But the alternative, letting Richard continue his toxic reign, potentially losing my job to satisfy the demands of a secret bigot, was simply not an option. I clicked send. The silence that followed felt deafening. Then, barely 2 hours later, an email from Brenda Riley's assistant landed in my inbox. Urgent meeting request, confidential. My stomach did a flip, but I replied confirming my availability for the afternoon video call. On the screen, Brenda Riley looked severe, her expression unreadable. David Chin, the EVP, looked visibly disturbed, his brow deeply furrowed. Mark, Brenda began, skipping pleasantries, we received your email and the attached document. This is extremely serious. Can you walk us through exactly how you came across these emails? I calmly reiterated my search through the old task force archive, stressing the accidental nature of the discovery. I assured them the PDF was an exact copy of the thread. David Chin leaned into his camera. Mark, I want to be clear, he said, his voice tight with anger. The sentiments expressed in these emails are abhorrent. They are completely antithetical to the values of this company and what we expect from our leaders. Frankly, I'm appalled. He looked genuinely shocked and disgusted. Brenda outlined the next steps. an immediate, confidential internal investigation. They stressed the importance of absolute discretion, which I readily agreed to. They also explicitly mentioned the company's zero-tolerance policy for retaliation against whistleblowers, which offered some comfort. They thanked me for bringing the matter forward. I logged off the call feeling a surge of cautious optimism. The bomb was armed and ticking. The following week was the strangest of my career. On the surface, everything continued as normal. Richard held another woke Wednesday, pontificating about microaggressions and the importance of safe spaces, completely oblivious to the storm gathering above his head. He even sent a follow-up email emphasizing the transformative potential of the upcoming mandatory training. Watching him perform, knowing what I knew, was a masterclass in biting my tongue. Meanwhile, the investigation proceeded quietly. Brenda Riley had brief, closed-door meetings with a few individuals Richard had interacted with years ago. There was a subtle tension in the air, hushed whispers, but nobody seemed to know what was really going on. Except me. I just kept my head down, did my work, and waited. Then late on Friday afternoon it happened. Richard was abruptly summoned to a meeting with Brenda and David Chin. He walked into the glass-walled conference room looking confident, almost smug, probably expecting a pat on the back. About 45 minutes later, the door opened. Richard emerged, but he looked like a different person. His face was chalk white, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. His usual immaculate posture was slumped. He clutched his briefcase like a shield, avoided eye contact with everyone he passed, and practically power-walked to the elevator, fumbling with the button. He looked utterly broken. Minutes later, an email from David Chin hit every inbox in the company. Subject: Leadership Update, Marketing Department. It was carefully worded corporate speak, announcing that Richard Sterling would be transitioning from his role as VP of Marketing Innovation and Inclusion, effective immediately. He was being reassigned to a vaguely defined, non-managerial special projects role in the strategy division, reporting to a mid-level director. No direct reports. No departmental oversight. It wasn't explicitly called a demotion, but the message was unmistakable. He had been stripped of all power, all influence. His woke kingdom had crumbled. A wave of relief washed over me so intense it almost made me dizzy. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let out a long, slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. Across the open-plan office, Emily caught my eye. A huge, genuine smile spread across her face and she gave me a thumbs up. Others exchanged knowing glances, a palpable sense of liberation settling over the department. There was no public shaming, no dramatic confrontation where I got to expose him in front of everyone. But seeing the look of pure panic on Richard's face as he fled, knowing his hypocrisy had imploded his career, knowing the threat was gone, that was profoundly, deeply satisfying. Justice didn't need to be loud. Sometimes the quiet implosion is sweetest. The change in the department was immediate and palpable. It was like a dark cloud had lifted. The oppressive tension vanished overnight. Conversations opened up, laughter returned to the hallways. The dreaded mandatory DI training was officially postponed indefinitely pending strategic review, which everyone understood meant cancelled. David Chin appointed an experienced internal director as interim head, someone respected for their competence and fairness, reminiscent of Sarah. The focus snapped back to actual marketing, to collaboration, to achieving results. Felt healthy again. Richard became a ghost within the company. Rumor had it he was assigned pointless busy work in a remote corner office, completely isolated. He was a pariah. Most people avoided him. His fall from grace was swift and total. About 6 months later, word trickled down that he had quietly resigned, disappearing from the company payroll without so much as a farewell email. Good riddance. Life settled back into its comfortable rhythm, but better. The stress that had permeated every workday was gone. I could focus on my job, enjoy my colleagues, and leave work at work again. My contributions were valued based on merit, not ideological conformity. While nobody ever explicitly mentioned the emails or my role in Richard's downfall, there was an unspoken understanding, a quiet respect from my colleagues. I was the guy who hadn't caved, the one who somehow stood up to the bully and won. Looking back, the whole ordeal seems surreal, a testament to how easily performative virtue can mask profound toxicity. Richard used the language of inclusion as a tool for exclusion, wielding accusations of bias to enforce his own rigid dogma and advance his career. He preached tolerance while harboring deep-seated prejudice. His downfall wasn't just about his hypocrisy, it was a victory for common sense, for genuine respect over hollow signaling. It proved that sometimes, the truth does come out, especially when someone leaves a digital trail of their own ugliness. And seeing that kind of woke overreach backfire so spectacularly, seeing the architect of that toxic environment face real consequences. Well, let's just say the peace I feel now, the restored balance in my work and life, that's the best kind of karmic justice. It's a deep, quiet satisfaction that lasts.